It was a quiet Tuesday evening, the kind where the world seems to slow down just enough for you to catch your breath. The dishes were done, the laundry folded, and my 6-year-old daughter, Emily, was tucked into bed, her soft snores drifting down the hallway. I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, savoring the rare moment of peace. That's when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. Who would be visiting at this hour? But then it rang again, sharper this time, more insistent. I set my tea down and walked to the door, peering through the peephole. A man stood on the porch, his face partially hidden under the shadow of a hoodie. My heart skipped a beat. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. "I need to talk to you," the man replied, his voice low and urgent. "It's about Emily." My breath caught in my throat. Emily? How did this stranger know my daughter's name? I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lock. Every instinct told me not to open the door, but curiosity, or maybe fear, got the better of me. I turned the knob and opened the door just a crack, the chain still in place. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling now. The man stepped closer, his face now visible under the porch light. He looked to be in his late 30s, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. There was something familiar about him, something I couldn't quite place. "My name is Daniel," he said, his tone calm but firm. "And I'm Emily's father." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I staggered back, my mind racing. Emily's father? That was impossible. Emily's father had walked out on us when she was just a baby, leaving nothing but a note and a broken heart. He hadn't been seen or heard from since. "You're lying?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Emily's father is gone. He left us. Who are you really, and what do you want?" Daniel's expression didn't change. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sliding it through the crack in the door. I stared at it for a moment before picking it up, my hands shaking. It was a photograph. A picture of me holding a newborn Emily in my arms, with Daniel standing beside us, his arm around my shoulders. My knees went weak. I remembered that day. It was the day we brought Emily home from the hospital. But how did he have this photo? And why was he here now after all these years? "Please," Daniel said, his voice softening. "Just let me explain. I know I don't deserve your trust, but this isn't about me. It's about Emily. She's in danger." My heart pounded in my chest. Danger? What was he talking about? I wanted to slam the door in his face, to call the police, to do anything but stand there and listen. But something in his eyes stopped me. There was a desperation there, a raw honesty that I couldn't ignore. Against my better judgment, I unchained the door and let him in. The moment Daniel stepped inside, the air in the room seemed to shift. He glanced around nervously, as if expecting someone to jump out at any moment. I closed the door behind him, my hands still trembling, and crossed my arms tightly over my chest. "Start talking," I said, my voice sharp, "and it better be good." Daniel took a deep breath, running a hand through his messy hair. "I know this is a lot to take in," he began, his voice steady but laced with guilt. "And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to understand why I left, and why I came back." I didn't say anything, just stared at him, waiting for an explanation. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, confusion, fear. How could he just show up after all these years and expect me to listen? "When Emily was born," he continued, "I was scared. I didn't think I could be a father. I had no idea what I was doing, and I felt like I was failing both of you every single day. So I ran. It was the biggest mistake of my life, and I've regretted it every day since." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. "You think that's an excuse? You think you can just waltz back in here and say you're sorry, and everything will be fine? You abandoned us, Daniel. You left me to raise Emily alone." "I know," he said, his voice breaking, "and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here because Emily is in danger." My heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about? What kind of danger?" Daniel hesitated, his eyes darting toward the hallway where Emily's room was. After I left, I got mixed up with some bad people. I thought I could start over, but they found me. They know about Emily, and they think she's leverage against me. If they find her. Leverage. I interrupted, my voice rising. What did you do, Daniel? What kind of trouble are you in? He looked down, shame written all over his face. I owe them money. A lot of money. And they're not the kind of people who take no for an answer. They've been tracking me for months, and now they know where I am. If they find out I came here, they'll come after Emily too. I felt like the walls were closing in around me. This couldn't be happening. Emily was just a little girl. She didn't deserve to be dragged into whatever mess Daniel had created. You need to leave, I said, my voice shaking. Right now. I don't care what kind of trouble you're in, but you're not going to put Emily in danger. Get out. Daniel didn't move. Instead, he reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. He handed it to me, his hand trembling. I didn't want to show you this, he said quietly. But you need to know what we're up against. I unfolded the paper, my heart pounding. It was a grainy photograph, taken from a distance. It showed Emily playing in the park, her bright pink jacket unmistakable. Someone had circled her in red ink. My stomach churned. Who took this? I whispered. They've been watching her, Daniel said, his voice barely audible. They've been watching both of you. That's why I came back. I couldn't let them hurt her. I couldn't let them hurt you. I sank onto the couch, my legs giving out beneath me. This was a nightmare. How had my life turned into this? What do we do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel sat down across from me, his expression grim. We need to leave. Tonight. I have a place we can go, somewhere they won't find us. But we have to move fast. I looked at him, my mind racing. Could I trust him? Did I even have a choice? The room felt suffocating. The weight of Daniel's words pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. I stared at the photograph in my hands, the red circle around Emily's small figure burning into my mind. Someone had been watching her. Watching us. The thought made my skin crawl. How long have they been following her? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. A few weeks, at least. I only found out about it a couple of days ago. That's when I knew I had to come back. Couldn't let them hurt her, Sarah. I couldn't let them hurt you. I flinched at the sound of my name. It had been years since I'd heard him say it, and it brought back a flood of memories. Some good, most of them painful. I shook my head, trying to focus. This wasn't about the past. This was about Emily. Where is this place you're talking about? I asked, my voice steadier now. Somewhere safe. Daniel nodded. It's a cabin up in the mountains. Isolated, off the grid. They won't be able to find us there. But we need to leave now. Every minute we wait puts Emily at risk. I glanced down the hallway toward Emily's room, my heart aching at the thought of uprooting her from her home, her school, her life. She was just a child. She didn't deserve this. What about the police? I asked, turning back to Daniel. Shouldn't we go to them? They can protect us. Daniel's face darkened. These people, they're not the kind you go to the police about. They have connections, Sarah. If we involve the authorities, it'll only make things worse. Trust me, this is the only way. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down, I knew he was right. If these people were as dangerous as he said, we couldn't take any chances. Okay, I said finally, my voice trembling. We'll go. But if anything happens to her, Daniel, I'll never forgive you. He nodded, his expression grim. I know. I stood up, my legs still shaky, and headed down the hallway to Emily's room. She was still asleep, her little face peaceful and innocent. I knelt beside her bed, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. Emily? I whispered, gently shaking her shoulder. Wake up, sweetheart. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Mommy? She mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. We're going on a little adventure, I said, forcing a smile. We need to pack some things. Okay? Can you be my big helper? Emily sat up, rubbing her eyes. Where are we going? Somewhere special, I said, avoiding her question. But we need to be quick. Can you get dressed for me? She nodded, still half asleep, and climbed out of bed. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started throwing clothes into it, whatever I could grab quickly. Jeans, sweaters, socks. I didn't know how long we'd be gone, but I wanted to be prepared. When I turned back to Emily, she was standing by the door, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Can Mr. Flopsy come too? She asked, her big eyes wide with concern. Of course he can, I said, forcing another smile. He's part of the family. I took her hand and led her back to the living room, where Daniel was waiting. He had a backpack slung over his shoulder and was pacing nervously by the door. Ready? He asked, his voice tense. I nodded, though I didn't feel ready at all. Let's go. We stepped outside into the cool night air, the street eerily quiet. Daniel led us to an old, beat-up car parked a few houses down. He opened the back door for Emily, helping her into her car seat, while I climbed into the passenger side. As we pulled away from the house, I glanced back, a lump forming in my throat. This was our home, our safe place, and now we were leaving it behind, running from a danger I didn't fully understand. It's going to be okay, Daniel said, as if reading my thoughts. I'll keep you both safe, I promise. I didn't respond, couldn't. All I could do was hold onto Emily's hand and pray that he was right. The drive was long and silent, the only sound the hum of the car's engine and the occasional rustle of Emily shifting in her sleep. She had dozed off almost immediately after we left, her head resting against the window, Mr. Flopsy tucked securely under her arm. I kept glancing back at her, my heart aching at how small and vulnerable she looked. Daniel focused on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The tension between us was palpable, a thick wall of unspoken words and unresolved emotions. I wanted to ask him a million questions. How had he gotten involved with these people? Why had he stayed away for so long? But I couldn't bring myself to break the silence. Instead, I stared out the window, watching the city lights fade into the darkness as we headed toward the mountains. The further we got from home, the more real this nightmare felt. I kept replaying the photograph in my mind, the red circle around Emily's tiny figure. Who were these people? What did they want? After what felt like hours, Daniel finally spoke. We're almost there, he said, his voice low. The cabin's just a few miles up this road. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The road narrowed, the trees closing in around us, their shadows stretching long and eerie in the moonlight. The car bounced over potholes and ruts, the headlights cutting through the dense forest. Finally, we pulled into a small clearing. The cabin was exactly as Daniel had described. Small, isolated, and surrounded by towering trees. It looked old but sturdy, with a chimney poking out of the roof and a porch that sagged slightly in the middle. Daniel parked the car and turned off the engine. Wait here, he said, opening his door. I'll check the place out first. I watched as he disappeared into the darkness, his flashlight bobbing as he approached the cabin. My heart raced as I glanced back at Emily, still asleep in the back seat. What if this was a mistake? What if Daniel wasn't who he said he was? Before I could spiral further, Daniel reappeared, waving us over. It's clear, he said. Let's get inside. I unbuckled Emily's seatbelt and gently shook her awake. We're here, sweetheart, I whispered. Time to get out of the car. She blinked up at me, her eyes heavy with sleep. Where are we, Mommy? Somewhere safe, I said, avoiding her question again. Come on, let's go. I helped her out of the car, holding her hand as we followed Daniel up the creaky porch steps and into the cabin. The inside was sparse but clean, with a small living area, a kitchenette, and 2 bedrooms. Daniel had already lit a few candles, their flickering light casting long shadows on the walls. It's not much, he said, setting his backpack down on the table. But it'll do for now. I nodded, too exhausted to care about the lack of amenities. Emily clung to my side, her eyes wide as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Can we go home tomorrow? she asked, her voice small. I knelt down, brushing her hair back from her face. Not tomorrow, sweetheart, but soon, okay? For now, we're going to stay here and have a little adventure. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. Instead, she hugged Mr. Flopsy tightly and leaned into me. Why don't you get some sleep? I said, leading her toward one of the bedrooms. I'll be right here if you need me. I tucked her into the narrow bed, pulling the blankets up to her chin. She was asleep almost instantly, her breathing soft and even. I sat beside her for a moment, watching her, my heart breaking at how innocent she looked. When I finally stepped back into the living room, Daniel was sitting at the table, his head in his hands. He looked up as I approached, his face etched with guilt and exhaustion. Thank you, he said quietly, for trusting me. I didn't have a choice, I replied, my voice cold. But this doesn't mean I forgive you. You left us, Daniel. You left her. And now you've dragged us into this mess. He flinched, but he didn't argue. I know, he said, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. But right now, we need to focus on keeping Emily safe. I crossed my arms, staring him down. Tell me everything. Who are these people? What do they want? And how do we stop them? Daniel hesitated, his eyes darting toward the bedroom where Emily slept. It's complicated, he said finally, but I'll tell you everything I know. Just sit down. I pulled out a chair and sat across from him, my heart pounding. Whatever he was about to say, I knew it would change everything. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his hands clasped tightly together. The candlelight flickered across his face, casting shadows that made him look older, more worn. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for what he was about to say. It started a few years after I left, he began, his voice low and measured. I was lost. I didn't know what to do with myself, so I started gambling. At first, it was just small stuff, poker games, betting on sports. But then I got in over my head. I owed money to the wrong people, and they weren't the kind you could just walk away from. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my anger in check. So, you ran away from us just to get yourself into more trouble? He flinched but didn't deny it. I was stupid, Sarah. I know that. But I thought I could fix it. I thought if I just kept playing, I could win enough to pay them back and start over. But it didn't work out that way. The more I owed, the deeper I got. And then, they found out about Emily. My blood ran cold. What do you mean, they found out about her? Daniel's jaw tightened. They knew I had a family. They knew about you and Emily. And they decided she was the perfect leverage to make sure I paid them back. That's when I realized I had to disappear again, to keep them away from her. But I guess I didn't do a good enough job because they found me. And now they know where we are. I stared at him, my mind racing. How much do you owe them? He hesitated, then said quietly, $500,000. The number hit me like a punch to the gut. $500,000? There was no way we could come up with that kind of money. Not in a lifetime. What are we supposed to do? I asked, my voice shaking. We can't just hide here forever. They'll find us eventually. Daniel's expression hardened. I have a plan, but it's risky, and I need your help. I didn't like the sound of that. What kind of plan? He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I know where they keep their money. If we can get to it, we can pay them back and end this for good. But it's not going to be easy. They'll be watching, and if we're caught... He didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew what he meant. If we were caught, it wouldn't just be Daniel they came after. It would be me. It would be Emily. You're asking me to help you steal from them? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm asking you to help me protect our daughter, he replied, his eyes pleading. I know I don't deserve your trust, Sarah, but I'm trying to make things right. Please. I looked away, my mind spinning. Could I really do this? Could I risk everything to help the man who had abandoned us? Before I could answer, a noise outside made us both freeze. It was faint, but unmistakable, the sound of footsteps on the porch. Daniel's eyes widened. They're here. The sound of footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the faint creak of the porch boards under someone's weight. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum. Daniel's eyes locked onto mine, his expression a mix of fear and determination. "Stay here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Don't make a sound." Before I could protest, he stood up and moved toward the door, his movements slow and deliberate. I wanted to stop him, to tell him this was a terrible idea, but my body felt frozen in place. All I could do was watch as he reached for the handle, his hand trembling slightly. The door burst open before he could touch it. A man stood in the doorway, his face obscured by a hood, a gun gleaming in his hand. Behind him, two more figures loomed in the shadows, their presence menacing and deliberate. My breath caught in my throat, and I instinctively took a step back, my mind screaming at me to protect Emily. Well, the man said, his voice cold and mocking. "Look who decided to come out of hiding." Daniel raised his hands, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "I've got the money. Just give me a little more time." The man laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sent chills down my spine. "Time's up, Daniel. You've been dodging us for too long, and now you've dragged your family into this. How noble of you." I felt a surge of anger, cutting through the fear. "Leave her out of this," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "She's just a child." The man turned his gaze toward me, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "And who's this? The ex-wife? You should have stayed out of this, sweetheart. Now you're part of the problem." Before I could respond, Daniel stepped forward, his voice rising. "I said I'd get you the money. Just leave them alone. This is between you and me." The man smirked, raising the gun and pointing it directly at Daniel. "Funny how you think you're in any position to make demands." My mind raced, panic clawing at the edges of my thoughts. I had to do something. I couldn't let this end like this. I couldn't let Emily wake up to this nightmare. Then, I heard it. A soft creak from the hallway. Emily's door was opening. "Mommy?" Her small voice called out, trembling with fear. The man's eyes flicked toward the sound, and in that split second, Daniel lunged. Everything happened so fast. There was a struggle. The gun went off, and the sound echoed through the cabin like a thunderclap. I screamed, rushing toward Emily, who was standing frozen in the hallway, her eyes wide with terror. "Get down!" I shouted, pulling her to the floor and shielding her with my body. When I looked up, the man was on the ground, clutching his arm, the gun lying just out of reach. Daniel stood over him, breathing heavily, his face pale but determined. The other two men hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do. "Get out," Daniel growled, his voice low and dangerous, "and tell your boss this is over. If any of you come near my family again, I won't hesitate to finish what I started." The men exchanged glances, then slowly backed away, dragging their injured companion with them. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving us in stunned silence. I held Emily tightly, my body trembling as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Daniel turned to us, his face filled with regret and relief. "It's over," he said softly. "They won't come back." I wanted to believe him, but the fear was still there, lingering like a shadow. Emily clung to me, her small hands gripping my shirt as she buried her face in my chest. "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking, "for everything." I didn't know what to say. The anger, the fear, the relief. It all swirled together, leaving me numb. But one thing was clear: we were alive. And for now, that was enough. The end.